by all indications, Shohei Ohtani is somebody whose number one priority when he's picking his new team is that he wants to join a winner. And so for the Giants, given their current roster is obviously not that attractive, wouldn't they be wise to go out and make a move now before ultimately making a legitimate Ohtani pursuit?
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday, talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever it is that you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. And coming up on today's show, we're going to jump into some mailbag questions. As always, you guys came through clutch with like a zillion questions, and so we're just going to jump right in. The first question, two people asked similar questions, and so Drew says, if the Giants want to improve their chances of landing Ohtani, wouldn't it be wise to make a splash move soon to show him we're serious about winning? Hard to believe he'd be excited about joining this current roster. And Manny says, will the Giants make any signings prior to any Ohtani news? Last year, they waited for Judge while most of the top talent signed elsewhere. I wouldn't want them to make the same mistake again. And so these are good points that I hadn't really thought of myself, but I really should have. And I think I earlier said there was a question the last time we did a mailbag about, like, would Ohtani hold up the market? And I was like, yes, I think he will hold up the market. But this makes me completely reconsider that, in that, yeah, I mean, if you, like, okay, adding Shohei Ohtani would just be such a huge deal to the San Francisco Giants, and it would be the headliner, obviously, of any move that they could make because he's the best free agent out there. But even if they got Ohtani in this dream scenario in which they somehow get Ohtani, that can't be all that they do, especially because next year he's not going to pitch. And so they would still need to add pitching. And so, yeah, I mean, go out there and make a splash. Go sign Yoshinobu Yamamoto like today. He's available to sign. Just blow him away. And, I mean, it depends on if you think he being Yamamoto would want to play under the shadow of Shohei Ohtani. All of this is speculative and unlikely. You know, to get Yamamoto and Ohtani, like either one of those guys would be a slam dunk, like, great result for the Giants. But yes, I think absolutely, like, I'm with you. Just the whole waiting game. Some teams just jump out and get the guys they want, and I would absolutely like to see the Giants do that, especially if they're planning to make a legitimate run at Ohtani. Excuse me. They, make themselves more attractive, be active, do something. And granted, I'll point out that, like, nothing has happened really, except Aaron Nola re-signing with the Phillies of significance in free agency yet. And so, but I don't know. I'm with you 100%. Next questions, again, two similar questions. D says, would we trade for Mike Trout? And SF Sports Fam says, what would a trade package look like for Juan Soto, Pete Alonso, or Mike Trout? And who would be the best fit for the Giants, and who is your preference? And so, straight to the point, to answer D's question, would we trade for Trout? I see no reason why they would not trade for a guy who has, as recently as a couple years ago been like the slam dunk best player in baseball. And yes, he's kind of dealt with some injuries and he's not getting any younger and he's signed through 2030. But when this guy is on the field, he's still absolutely one of the best players in baseball. And so would they? They absolutely would. And should they? They absolutely should. And so when it comes to SF Sports Fam's question about what would a trade package look like for Soto, Alonso, or Trout, Soto and Alonso are in their own category here because they are both in their last year of team control. So a trade I've kind of discussed this before, but a trade package for Soto would probably look somewhat similar to what the trade package looked like for Mookie Betts when the Dodgers got him, which was less than you would think. Although that trade involved money kind of going, the Dodgers took on a few years of David Price's contract. So they essentially paid money to make the prospect return lower, and they gave up Alex Verdugo. They gave up Jeter Downs, who was considered, I don't know, like a top 25, top 50 prospect. It wasn't a huge return for the Red Sox. Part of the reason Chaim Bloom was so hated in Boston, basically. And for Pete Alonso, you're talking about the same thing, but less, because as good as Pete Alonso is, Juan Soto is even better. And for Soto, the difference though, so I don't know, basically Soto or Alonso would cost a significant amount, and Soto more so. But given that they're only under team control for one more year, the cost would not be as high as you think. And it would still be a lot, but not as high as you think. And so what would it cost? I'm not giving up probably Kyle Harrison for either of those guys, especially Pete Alonso. I might do it. I definitely might do it for Soto if you felt like you could extend him, but I don't think that you would be able to. And so for moving on, like, I can't give you an exact answer, but just know, like, it just totally matters that they're entering their last year of team control. And for Soto, he's going to be making like over $30 million. So it's going to take up a lot of your payroll, and it's only a 1-year guarantee. And then he's going to hit free agency and very possibly leave you. And so that's why teams just aren't willing to give up like insane packages for this type of situation. But for Trout, it's completely different because Mike Trout, like I said, is signed through 2030. He is signed through 2030 with salaries, it looks like, every year from here on out of $37.1 million. And so that's, arguably an underwater contract at this point in time. What is it? 37. I can't do this math on the fly here, knowing how many years are remaining until 2030. 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So 7 years times 37.1 equals, what does this contract look like? It's a 7-year, $260 million deal. Now, I'm not going to call that underwater, but we are talking about a guy who is going to be 32 until August when he turns 33. So you're talking age 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, and 38 seasons. So you're paying very much for the decline years when he's already dealt with frequent injuries over the last 3 seasons. I've said this before, but over the last 3 seasons combined, I think the average games played is like 79. He's missed a ton of time with injuries. So it makes it complicated. So coming up in just a minute, we'll wrap up that question and get to more, including, is Farhan Zaidi finally going to break character and sign a pitcher to a long-term deal this offseason? You won't want to miss what I have to say about that in just a minute. And before we get into it, all right, as promised, going to wrap up that question on Mike Trout. It's a complicated trade value situation with him, given everything I was saying, and then we're going to get to more mailbag questions. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers tomorrow on the show, barring any. Actually, when I say tomorrow, today's Friday. We're going to have 2 episodes today, and they're both going to be mailbags. So if you just want to, as soon as this one's done, check out the next one or wait till Saturday, whatever, however you'd like. But 2 mailbags coming out today because we didn't do yesterday because it was Thanksgiving. But by the way, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Excuse me, I just bumped my microphone there, if you heard that, which I'm sure you did. Anyway, getting back to the Trout question, I didn't want to just cut that one short. It's complicated. What did I say? 7 years, 260? I think like the problem is, from the Angels' perspective, they don't just want to give up Mike Trout for nothing. And at that price, given his injury history the last few years and an increasing strikeout rate, like he was a guy who was down in the low 20s and even high teens at his peak, and now he's kind of crept up closer to 30%. Still has enormous power, still very good overall, and absolutely you want Mike Trout on your team. Like, there's just no doubt. But given the injuries, a team's not going to want to give up much in the way of prospects when you're paying $37 million a year, which is high. I mean, Aaron Judge, I think, is the highest paid position player per year at $40 million. So Trout is pretty close there. And you might say, well, Trout's just as good. Well, but more of an injury concern and a little bit older, I think, or they're roughly the same age. So I think it's kind of a market value contract, in which case the Angels would have to pay probably some of the money. Say they bring it down to like $30 million a year, or even in the 20s, like $27 million a year, and then they're going to get more. And so that, I feel like that would have to happen. Otherwise, the Angels wouldn't get much in return, and they have really no reason to trade this guy and get nothing in return. Like, in their perfect world, like, they should probably pay down as much as possible to get the maximum return in terms of players. And so that makes it almost impossible to answer the question, because it depends on how much money is involved. But I think money would have to be involved. Anyway, next question from Bartlett, who says, will Farhan Zaidi break character and sign a pitcher to more than 3 years? And I could give you a 1-sentence answer here. Yes, I think he will. And it makes me, I just can't answer this question without saying that you have to believe there's legitimate regret on their side about not giving Gausman the contract that he ended up taking from the Blue Jays, they probably could have offered him less than this and he would have come back. He wanted to return, and he got 5 years, $110 million, and that contract just looks more and more reasonable by the day so far. He was a top 3 Cy Young finisher this season. He's done nothing but continue to be excellent, like he was with the Giants when he was here. And it's like they wouldn't do a 5-year deal for him. There were, he was a 2-pitch pitcher. I think there was some concern about that. He also really struggled in the second half of 2021, his last year here. Had some personal stuff going on, I think, as well. But, man, he's just been a workhorse in Toronto, and he's been really good in Toronto. Across 2 seasons now, Kevin Gausman, by the way, 3.25 ERA, strikeout rate 30%, 359 and 2/3 innings. 3 years to go, but at 3 years, $66 million. I mean, it's just such a reasonable thing. He could have, he's been a 5-win pitcher, according to fielding independent pitching. According to actual results, a little bit less than that. He's kind of underperformed the peripherals. But regardless, I'm saying, man, you wouldn't do 5 years for Gausman, and now you're talking about some of these guys like Aaron Nola at age 31 just got a 7-year contract. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, who knows how many years it's going to take for him. But the strength of this free agent class is starting pitching. Farhan Zaidi has talked about how this offseason their goal is more so going to be less short-term deals, less opt-outs, and just more kind of continuity with the players they bring in, not having guys just kind of in and out of the revolving door. And I think part of that is ownership saying, look, we gave you your way, and your way is not only hasn't worked the last couple seasons, but also fans are not happy. And so, if ownership wants something, they're the ones in charge. And I think that given that the strength of this class is starting pitching, and there's so many guys who deserve and will get more than 3 years, then I see the Giants signing one of them. And, one of the guys who makes the most sense is Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and he's 25. And so it could be way more than 3 years when you're talking about a guy that young. So anyway, the next question, and I just say yes. That's my prediction. More than 3 years, yes, for a starting pitcher. Ken says, how many extra wins would Shohei Ohtani add to the Giants? Would he alone make the Giants a 90 to 92 win team? Compare first year as full DH versus being a two-way player. And as a two-way player, I think that he alone does, in fact, put them in the realm of a 90 win team. And that's the thing that I've always said about like the Angels versus the Giants. The Angels are like worse than the Giants, and they have Ohtani and Trout. The Giants are like finishing around 500 the last couple of years, and they don't have any of those kinds of guys. And so it's a different situation. But this year, this is crazy. This year, Shohei Ohtani, according to Fangraphs, was worth 6.6 wins above replacement with his bat alone, not counting his pitching. But that's a career high. The year prior, 3.8. The year before that, 5.1. And he basically played, this year he missed more time than he did in either of the other 2 years, and it was by far his best season with the bat. This year he hit 304, 412 on base, 654 slugging, hit 44 home runs. Just insane. Just insane. And so when let me just average those 3 seasons, even though, there was some injuries to take into account this year. But we're talking about a guy who averaged about 5.2 wins above a replacement level player just with his bat in the last 3 years. And so if you say the Giants are, obviously there are some players reaching free agency, but not many of significance for the Giants. I think right now, signing him maybe takes you to a mid-80s win team. But when you add in pitching, this year, I like runs allowed per 9 WAR as opposed to like just WAR on Fangraphs, which uses fielding independent pitching. This year, Ohtani was limited to 132 innings, ended up requiring Tommy John surgery. But this year, 3.8 runs allowed per 9 wins above replacement. I know that's a mouthful. In 132 innings. Last year, 6.2. So you look at 6.2 with his pitching last year, in addition to like 4 with his bat. So that's about 10 wins. So when you're talking 10 wins, you're talking like Barry Bonds. You're talking like peak Mike Trout. You're just talking about the best player in the game. And so he's roughly a 10-win player at this point. And so if the Giants are coming in around 80 wins, then yeah, he does make you a 90-win team when he's pitching and when he's hitting simultaneously. But, we don't know exactly how he'll return to form when he comes back and pitches. But with just his bat, he was so good this season. And by the way, the projection, let me just talk about the Steamer projection, has him as a 4-win player for 2024. And so, what did I say? 5.2 is what he's averaged the last few years. 4 is the projection. So I don't know, call it 4 to 5 wins just on his bat alone, which is tremendously crazy when you talk about as just a DH. I mean, it means you're one of the he was the best hitter in the game this year, and projections have him continuing to be, like, if not the best, one of the best hitters in the game. But providing no defensive value and still adding that kind of impact is pretty remarkable. But just in 2024, there are probably players out there who will provide more impact, because Ohtani, as great as he is, he's not doing anything but hitting in 2024. But once he starts pitching again, ooh, man, you're talking, like I said, about Barry Bonds, Mike Trout. You're just talking about all-time kind of most impactful players that there are. So coming up in just a minute, more questions and answers. We're going to get into the surplus of third base options for the Giants, and does it mean they might trade a guy like Wilmer Flores? We'll answer that question and a few others in just a minute. And before we do, all right, as promised, more questions and answers. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, not tomorrow, but later on today, we're going to have a second mailbag episode. So listen today for a whole hour of Locked On Giants content, or tomorrow or over the weekend, whatever you want. So look out for that. But the next question comes from, who does it come from? Nico, who says, given the influx of third base options, J.D. Davis, Wilmer Flores, Casey Schmidt, Marco Luciano, and potential signing of Matt Chapman, as just an example, does it make sense to trade Flores now while his value is high? Maybe for some bullpen and middle infield depth. And could they also package Conforto/Haniger in there too? So I do think that trading Conforto or Haniger could end up making a lot of sense, given the well-documented, I've talked about this a million times, crowd they have in the outfield. It's kind of outrageous how many, like, fine but not great outfielders that they have. And even if you move some to DH, and then you're talking about also not even accounting for some young guys like Luis Matos and Tyler Fitzgerald, it's crazy. But third base, you've got a somewhat similar situation, and it's somewhat similar too in the sense that you've got a lot of guys who are like, okay, they're fine, but also no one's blowing your socks off in terms of their expected production, but they're not also going to be terrible necessarily, especially when we're talking, I don't know, Flores, I don't think he really is a third baseman. And so that I think he's a first baseman is like the position that he can play, and he could also DH. But his value is high, in fact, because he just, like, unlike all the rest of the Giants, he was immune to this slump that everyone went into for the final 4 months of the season, 3-4 months of the season. And he just had basically the best year of his career, the best offensive year of his career, the best overall year of his career. Hit 284, 355 on base, 509 slugging, 23 home runs was a career high. Strikeout rate just 14%, actually 13.9. Unbelievable season Wilmer Flores just had. And so in my opinion, I don't want them to trade him. I don't think other teams will put enough value on him, or even if they do, he's just not the guy I want to be the odd man out, even if you could get a good return. I just think he has a lot of value to the Giants, but there is definitely a logjam situation, and it's all over the place. I wouldn't necessarily call it third base, because again, I don't want Wilmer Flores playing third, like, to put it bluntly. And this year he played only 131 innings at third base versus 415 at first base. By games played, 61 at first, 41 at DH, 22 at third. So we're talking 102 games at first and DH, and 20, so about a fifth of the playing time at third versus first and DH. And so I would expect that kind of to continue. But if you did sign a Matt Chapman, that kind of pushes J.D. Davis over to first/DH, and then that creates a bit of a, I don't like that word redundancy, because they both have value, but it's more of a logjam, and you don't really have room. But I'd rather probably trade a J.D. Davis, honestly, if you signed like a Matt Chapman than a Wilmer Flores. But so, and anyway, for just depth, relief pitching depth and middle infield depth, I get what you mean, like like someone to cover that shortstop spot, like as insurance for Luciano. I just don't want to trade Wilmer Flores. I just think he's a fan favorite, not doing it for me. And instead just trade one of the outfielders and find a way to fit Flores. And if you've got to trade an infielder, I think Davis makes more sense, or it's just more expendable to the Giants. Next question from Aiden, who says, in a more general sense, can you explain how the two defensive measuring systems can differ so much on players like Pete Alonso? And when they do differ, which one do clubs favor? And so when you say the two, I think you're referring to an answer I gave, or like a comment I made just the other day talking about Pete Alonso, and I was looking at his defensive metrics, and I was like, these two numbers don't agree. And I believe what I was discussing was defensive runs saved and outs above average. And so, yeah, defensive runs saved has Pete Alonso in his career starting in 2019 at +5 defensive runs saved as a first baseman, whereas StatCast outs above average has him at -16. Now, one thing to keep in mind is outs above average is different than defensive runs saved. And defensive runs saved is, just to give like a full explanation here, is kind of presented in runs above average. So 5 runs above average, according to defensive runs saved for Alonso, versus StatCast not only has outs above average, but they also have runs above average, and it's -12. So that's still a big discrepancy. It's just smaller, a little bit smaller than it was with outs above average. But it's the same tool that's saying he's not good. However, this season, StatCast said he was average. So it's kind of not only has it fluctuated or like differed between the two metrics, but it fluctuates year to year. So in general, defensive metrics like these should be taken in larger samples and not like single season samples. As far as I understand, like because they're just imperfect tools. And so the one thing I'll say is that defensive runs saved, believe it or not, like people act like the computer, like I think most baseball fans and even a lot of like baseball analysts don't really understand how something like defensive runs saved is calculated. But it's done by human beings in a town in Pennsylvania, Sports Info Solutions. And they basically just watch all these different plays, and they kind of rate the difficulty and compare. I don't know exactly how it's done, but human beings are heavily involved in the process. Whereas StatCast outs above average, runs above average, that is actually done entirely by the StatCast system. And the thing about the StatCast system is that it's very sophisticated. It's the same like technology. If you ever watch like professional tennis and you see them with the replays of, is the ball in or out, and it can just tell like down to the millimeter, centimeter, just like tiny, it can just see. That's what we're now using for the strike zone too. When it zooms in, you can see like, did it just miss the box? So for these, how can they differ? Honestly, what I would look at, like for the StatCast metric, it can break it down into different categories, and defensive runs saved can as well. Like, is it about range? Is it about your arm? Is it about picks as a first baseman? Sometimes, like, I think some of the metrics don't even incorporate picks, like scoops out of the dirt, and some do. And then in terms of what do teams value more, Honestly, I think it's probably trended more towards StatCast because this is like a totally objective system. And it's also, like I said, it's done by this like Hawkeye radar system that is like used in fighter jets. I think it's like some really high tech stuff here that they use for this. And when all is said and done, though, if there's a discrepancy and you're not sure, I would rely on scouting. I would rely on my scouts who watch the Mets and say, what do you think? And hopefully it's a good scout who's not just like, you know, someone who's really paying attention and looking at range and looking at all the different things that go into defense. And so defensive runs saved is a huge step in the right direction away from just fielding percentage. But I think the StatCast ones have kind of taken over, for me at least, as a preference just in general among the two. But I'm not positive. I'd have to ask someone working for a team. Like they probably have their own proprietary defensive metrics, to be honest. And so, but I think StatCast is better. But how do you explain it? I don't know exactly. I don't know. I would break it down and see where is the discrepancy. If you can break it down by throwing, range, picks, errors, all that kind of stuff. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers, we're going to have another Mailbag episode coming out today on Friday, so be on the lookout for that. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Anyway, once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. Helps me out a lot, so thanks in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again later on today. So thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.